Today, Triumph announced their brand new 2024 Daytona 660, and I was lucky enough to go and check it out in the flesh yesterday at their factory in the UK. And certainly, a new sports bike bearing the iconic Daytona name is an exciting prospect, but given that it's based upon the same budget-friendly 660 platform as the Trident and Tiger Sport, the question is this new machine performance-orientated and exciting enough to be worthy of it? Well, in this video, we'll go through all of the specs and details with a full walk around to find out.
So look, we'll go nose to tail to make sure we don't miss anything, and starting with the wheels, well naturally they're 17 inches front and rear, they're cast aluminium with a 5-spoke design, and they may look a little bit familiar if you've ever seen the Trident or Tiger Sport 660. So naturally there are plenty of shared components, but everything's just being sharpened up to suit the more sporting personality of this bike.
Take the tyres for example. The Trident and Tiger Sport both ship with Michelin's excellent Road 5s, which are a sports touring tyre that offer all-weather performance with a relatively deep tread. The Daytona though, well this is on their Power 6s, and while they are fairly similar, they should offer a little bit more grip and sporty handling in generally drier conditions.
And it's pretty much the same story again with the brakes. So you've got big 310mm discs, a pair of them up front, and that's the same diameter as the other two bikes. But whereas they get 2-part axially mounted calipers, which are relatively basic, this bike gets 4 pistons and they're radially mounted. So they should offer a little more crispness at the lever and a slightly more sporty feel that should suit the riding style of this bike a little bit better. You will also notice that the brake calipers are Triumph branded, which I think is a bit of a first for them. And while I guess they're probably made by one of the major brake manufacturers, not having a big brand name on the side of them probably helps to save a little bit on manufacturing costs, and that's probably a factor that's helped them hit a very impressive price point with this bike, which we'll get onto towards the end of this video, and look how it compares to some of the competition.
Onto the suspension, and we've got a Showa separate function big piston fork up front with 110mm of travel and no adjustability. Now this will sound familiar if you've seen the specs for the Trident and the Tiger Sport, and I guess this is where some of the Daytona fans might feel this bike is starting to come up a little bit short versus previous iterations. I'd say for anyone who takes their sports bike riding seriously, especially if you're thinking of going to the track, then adjustability on the fork is pretty much non-negotiable, but ultimately the other two bikes handle pretty sweetly with a similar fork, and so I'm sure this one will also be set up quite nicely for the majority of riders.
Now up to the front here, and we've got LED lighting all round, so LED headlights. This one's got the accessory scrolling LED indicators, but you do get LEDs as standard anyway. And one of the new features of note on the lighting front for this bike is the emergency stop warning feature, which will flash the rear indicators at twice the normal rate when you're decelerating particularly heavily. I mean, to be fair, this is a feature we've seen on other bikes for a while now, like the Honda lineup, but rear end shunts can be pretty nasty, so anything that's going to help to prevent them is a good thing in my book.
As for the aesthetics of the front end, well the headlights do have a shade of Daytonas of the past, and also you can see quite easily that it's in the same family as the Tiger Sport 660. But it's all just looking a little more chiseled with some sharper lines to the bodywork and fairing, and I think they've done quite a handsome job, particularly in this Carnival Red, which you'll also find on their Speed Triple 1200RR. But I also think the grey with the Triumph Racing yellow accents, or the white which looks most like the 675, both look pretty sweet too. Now tucked in behind the fairing, we've also got the same dash as the Trident and Tiger Sport, which uses a split design.
At the top half, we've got an inverted LCD display, super punchy and bright even in sunny conditions, and this gives you the basics, so speed, revs and gear position and that sort of thing. But then sat below it, we've got a small 2-inch TFT display, and that can be used to manage the menus and settings, things like the self-cancelling indicators, as well as the rider aids and riding modes. So of course you've got ABS, that's not switchable, but traction control is switchable, and also you've got a few riding modes to choose from.
In fact, this is one of the most welcome changes for me, because having owned the Trident for a year or two, although I thoroughly enjoyed it, I just wished it had a little bit more snap to the throttle response to make it feel more lively. A sport mode, in my opinion, would have been a great way to achieve that, but both the Trident and the Tiger Sport just come with the 2 modes of road and rain.
So the good news for this bike, given that it's a little bit more sporty, is it does in fact get the 3 modes, so sport, road and rain, and so I'm massively looking forward to seeing how this performs out on the road when we manage to get hold of one in a few months' time. Now the the other thing I should mention with that small TFT display is that if you do spec up their Bluetooth connectivity accessory, you can connect it to your phone or a headset, and that's going to open up call handling and messages and music and media playback, as well as turn-by-turn navigation if you use the My Triumph app to plot a route. Now, naturally, if you want to make the most of those features, then you're going to need a decent Bluetooth headset, and so that's a great opportunity for me to give a huge thanks to today's video sponsor, and that's Cardo.
In my opinion, Cardo make the best headsets on the market, and we specifically use their top-of-the-line PackTalk Edge. So if you're looking to make the most of the connectivity features on a bike like this, then the JBL design speakers offer exceptional audio quality so that your music and podcasts will be crystal clear. On top of that, the mic quality and noise gating will mean that you can easily take phone calls without any annoying wind noise, even at motorway speeds. Then, if you're riding in a group, the comms features of the PackTalk Edge, in my experience, are far superior to regular old Bluetooth, primarily because of their dynamic mesh communication system. This means you can pair up to 15 riders in a group with up to a mile between each, and the more riders that join, the stronger the network. But thing is, even if someone does drop back, there's no need to manually add them to the group again because DMC automatically heals. Genuinely, these are the best comms units I've ever used, and so do check out the link down in the description below to find out more, and you'll also find down there a discount code specifically for my viewers. So once again, a huge thanks to Cardo for their support, and with that, back to the bike.
Now, another big talking point for this bike is the handlebar position, because while it is a little more aggressive than something like the Trident, it's narrower, it's more tucked in, it's a little bit lower as well. It's still not quite as aggressive as a true super sport bike like the 675, where the bars will probably come up a little bit below the top yokes. But thing is, like I say, Triumph have designed this bike to be a proper all-rounder, and so I think for the majority of riders, if you're riding on the road, this will probably actually be preferable versus some of the competition they mentioned in the press briefing, like the Kawasaki Ninja 650, which is quite upright, and the Yamaha R7, which is a little bit more low at the front with your weight on your wrists. Try and say that this bike sits somewhere in the middle and perhaps kind of similar to something like the Honda CBR 650R.
Moving back from there, we've got a 14-litre fuel tank, which is a plastic cover over a metal tank inside like the other 660 bikes. And given that this engine is relatively efficient at 4.9 litres consumed per 100 kilometers travelled, providing you ride steady, that should be enough for over 270 kilometers or 170 miles of range. Now, one of the things I think they've done a brilliant job of with the styling is the plastic panels on the side, which give it a bit of a look of an aluminium frame. But actually, underneath we've got pretty much the same tubular steel frame as the Trident and Tiger Sport, which is more fitting for this sort of price point. There is, however, a bit of a tweak to the geometry, partly owing to a longer rear shock, which helps to give it a steeper head angle and less trail that should make this bike feel more nimble and quick turning.
Now, moving down to the engine, and this is roughly the same 660 inline triple as the other two bikes, which in itself sort of trickled down from the 675 engine that you used to find in the Daytona and Street Triple. What they did though for the Trident and the Tiger Sport is made it a little bit more mid-rangey and all-day usable, and so peak power for those bikes comes in at around 80 horses, which I think is plenty for that style of riding, but perhaps for a bike with the Daytona name, you'd want a little bit more. Thankfully in this one they've given it a few thousand more revs at the top end, and so that means that peak power has been lifted by around 17%, and so it comes in at 95 PS, which is pretty much 94 horsepower.
They've done this with a whole host of changes to the internals, including bigger exhaust valves, new cam profiles, and a new piston with low friction coating, to name but a few. And the result, when you look at the dyno chart, is all the mid-range and usability of the Trident, but just with that extra power available at the top. But on top of all that, there's a new shorter final drive ratio and also new gear ratios to match the faster engine speed to the road. And so overall, I'm expecting this bike to feel quite a bit more punchy.
Now onto the seat, and this is 810mm in the seat height, so that's 5mm up on the Trident. And although you do have a slightly more sporty peg position, it's a little bit further back and up. It's still not super aggressive with a 825 or 835mm seat height like you might get with a more focused super sport. To be fair though, 810mm should make it more accessible to more riders. And I also like that you've got a split seat design on this bike. So whereas with the Trident and the Tiger Sport, it's just one long unit, with this one you get a separate rider and passenger seat. And not only does that mean you've got a little bit of security that holds you in place when you're riding quicker, but also you can swap that passenger seat out easily for this single seat setup with the tail cover, and that just gives it a bit more of that sporty solo look.
Finishing off the tail section, we've got the same tail light as the other 660 bikes, and then moving down to the silencer, we've also got one that looks the same. Thing is though, I'd expect this bike to sound quite a bit better to the rider, because whereas the air intake is located under the seat on the Trident for example, with the repackaging on this bike, it's actually up around the tank area, which should make for much more induction noise in the cockpit under acceleration.
Then you've got the same steel swing arm as the Trident and Tiger Sport, which is, they say, one of the few components that hasn't really had any changes, and that's linked to the frame with a Showa shock, and that's preload adjustable of course, so that you can adjust the sag of the bike if you do fancy taking a passenger. And then you've got a single part Triumph branded caliper at the rear on a 220mm disc, and the same cast wheel and Michelin Power 6 tyre as you get at the front, although I should point out this is a nice wide 180/55 tyre, so it's got a bit of that big bike look from the rear end.
All in, this bike tips the scales at 201 kilograms weight, which is about 10 kilograms more than the Trident owing to the extra bodywork, and also about 10 kilograms more than the Yamaha R7, which is probably the best in this class. But I still think it's acceptable for the money, and also given the extra 20 horsepower or so versus the R7, it'll still have the better power to weight ratio.
Price wise, we're looking at $8,595 for the most basic color option on this bike. You will pay a little bit more for something like this red one, but I think that puts it in a really good spot. It looks quite good versus something like the R7 for example, and although there are other bikes like the Ninja 650 that undercut it by quite a bit, I think in terms of performance they're not really even going to be comparable. As for whether it deserves the Daytona name, well I think if you're expecting something like the 675, then of course this is going to be a lot less focused and aggressive, but actually in terms of what looks like it's selling well on the market at the moment, this looks like it's really going to do the job. And I think within the constraints of what you can do with a sort of relatively chilled out sports bike, it still does have a bit of the pizzazz and flair of the Daytona styling, and I think that's going to help it stand out when it goes on sale in dealers.
As always though, I'd love to know what you think of it, so do let me know down in the comments below. Also, I've made a playlist here of my reviews of the other 660 bikes, so the Trident and Tiger Sport, just in case you haven't seen them already, so do give them a click and give them a watch. Also, do hit subscribe if you haven't already if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on YouTube. Many thanks for watching today, and we'll catch you in the next video.